What if I told you that one of the most controversial episodes in television history was almost never seen? Not because it was bad, not because it was unfinished, but because a major American network believed it went too far. This is not an urban legend. It is not a fan theory. It is a documented chapter in television history. The episode is Plato's Stepchildren, 1968, from Star Trek, the original series, and NBC very nearly refused to broadcast the episode in question. In the third season of Star Trek, the original series, an episode aired that would quietly enter television history for reasons far beyond its plot. The title was Plato's Stepchildren. It premiered on November 22, 1968. By that time, Star Trek was already under pressure. Ratings had slipped. NBC had moved the show to a difficult Friday night slot, and the network was scrutinizing every script. The series was surviving, but barely. On paper, the premise of the episode sounds like classic science fiction. The USS Enterprise answers a distress call from a planet whose inhabitants have developed powerful telekinetic abilities. These beings model themselves after figures from ancient Greek philosophy. Their leader, Alexander, is charismatic, cruel, and completely intoxicated by power. What begins as a routine diplomatic mission slowly turns into psychological torment. Alexander and his followers use their telekinetic abilities not just to control objects, but to dominate people. They humiliate Captain Kirk. They force him to crawl. They compel him to sing. They treat the crew of the Enterprise as toys. The tone is unusually dark. The episode lingers on degradation and emotional cruelty in ways that were rare for network television at the time. Captain Kirk, played by William Shatner, is stripped of dignity. Mr. Spock, portrayed by Leonard Nimoy, is also subjected to humiliation. The story becomes less about science fiction spectacle and more about power without morality. It explores what happens when intelligence evolves without empathy. This thematic darkness already made the episode uncomfortable. NBC executives were wary of material that seemed sadistic. Primetime television in 1968 operated under far stricter content expectations than audiences today might realize. Scenes of prolonged humiliation pushed against those boundaries. But the episode contained one moment that would overshadow everything else. It was not a battle. It was not a speech. It was not a special effect. It was a kiss. That single scene transformed Plato's Stepchildren from a standard third season episode into one of the most discussed chapters in television history. And it nearly changed the way NBC handled it altogether. Before we understand why the network hesitated, we need to understand exactly why that kiss mattered in 1968 America. The first interracial kiss on American network television. The moment that transformed Plato's Stepchildren from a routine third season episode into a cultural milestone lasted only a few seconds. It was not written as romance. It was not framed as a celebration. It was a forced act carried out under telekinetic control. Yet it became one of the most discussed scenes in the history of American television. In the episode, Captain James T. Kirk, portrayed by William Shatner, and Lieutenant Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols, are mentally controlled by Alexander and his followers. Using their powers, the villains force Kirk to take Uhura in his arms and kiss her against their will. The humiliation is deliberate. The act is designed to degrade them both. But regardless of narrative context, the visual was unprecedented for network television drama in 1968. A white leading man and a black female officer sharing a kiss on primetime television carried symbolic weight that went far beyond the episode's plot. The United States in 1968 was not socially calm. The Civil Rights Act had passed only 4 years earlier. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. had shaken the country that same year. But segregationist attitudes remained entrenched in parts of the nation. Television networks were acutely aware of regional divisions. Affiliate stations in conservative markets held power. If affiliates refused to air an episode, advertisers could be affected. Revenue could suffer. NBC executives knew this. Their hesitation was not abstract. It was financial and political. According to cast accounts and production history, NBC requested alternate versions of the scene. The idea was not necessarily to eliminate it entirely, but to reduce the physical intimacy. Different takes were filmed. In later interviews, William Shatner explained that he deliberately exaggerated facial expressions during those alternate takes so they would not be usable. Whether intentional sabotage or playful defiance, the result was the same. The most natural and complete version of the kiss remained the only viable option. NBC ultimately aired that version. What followed did not match executive fears. Viewer correspondence was overwhelmingly supportive. Studio records indicate only a single complaint letter that objected primarily to the coercive nature of the scene rather than to the interracial aspect. There was no widespread boycott, no mass affiliate rebellion. Context is important. While other television programs had depicted interracial contact in limited ways, Plato's Stepchildren is widely cited as one of the first scripted primetime network dramas to show a kiss between a black woman and a white man. Nichelle Nichols later reflected on how significant her role had been. She had considered leaving Star Trek, the original series early in its run. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who encouraged her to stay, emphasizing that her presence represented a vision of equality on screen. In that light, the kiss was not merely a controversial moment. It was part of a broader cultural statement about the future. NBC feared the reaction. Instead, the moment became historic. The network's anxiety revealed the boundaries of the time. The audience response revealed that those boundaries were already shifting. Why NBC hesitated to understand NBC's hesitation, it is essential to step back and examine the television industry in 1968. Network broadcasting operated under a centralized system. 3 major networks dominated prime time. Advertising revenue depended on maintaining broad appeal across a politically and culturally divided country. When standards and practices departments reviewed scripts carefully, executives balanced creative ambition against financial risk. Star Trek, the original series, had already established itself as a program willing to engage social themes through science fiction. Under the leadership of Gene Roddenberry, the show depicted a future in which humanity had moved beyond many of its present conflicts. The bridge crew of the Enterprise was intentionally diverse. Lieutenant Uhura was not a background character. She was a commissioned officer with authority and intelligence. Even so, a visual depiction of interracial intimacy was categorically different from integrated casting. Physical contact carried greater symbolic weight. In 1968, such imagery still triggered apprehension among network executives. But NBC's concern was primarily pragmatic. Affiliate stations across the country possessed the ability to preempt network programming. In conservative regions, particularly in parts of the South, interracial relationships remained socially controversial. Executives worried that affiliates might refuse to broadcast the episode. If multiple stations opted out, national advertising campaigns could be disrupted. Sponsors could question their association with the program. The episode's tone compounded these concerns. Plato's Stepchildren is among the darker installments of the series. Captain Kirk is humiliated in prolonged scenes. Mr. Spock is subjected to degradation. The villains derive pleasure from cruelty. This emphasis on psychological torment was already pushing the limits of what primetime audiences expected from a science fiction adventure series. Network executives reportedly debated whether the episode went too far. Internal discussions centered on both the kiss and the overall intensity of the humiliation sequences. Requests for alternate takes were part of a risk mitigation strategy. If backlash occurred, NBC could choose a softened version for rebroadcast. It is critical to emphasize what did not happen. NBC did not issue a permanent ban. They did not refuse to schedule the episode outright. They did not demand its destruction. Instead, they evaluated the potential consequences and sought flexibility. Ultimately, the decision to air the original version reflected a calculation. The network concluded that suppressing the scene entirely might generate as much attention as airing it. Removing it could invite criticism from a different direction. By 1968, cultural conversations about race were already national and unavoidable. Avoidance itself carried risk. When the episode aired, the anticipated backlash did not materialize. Affiliate stations carried the broadcast. Advertisers did not withdraw en masse. Viewer response was largely positive. NBC's hesitation illustrates the tension between corporate caution and evolving social norms. Networks often act conservatively, assuming audiences are less prepared for change than they actually are. In this case, the audience proved more adaptable than feared. But the debate behind Plato's Stepchildren reveals how close cultural milestones can come to being diluted by anxiety. It also demonstrates that progress sometimes depends on executives deciding that risk is manageable rather than unacceptable. Was it truly lost? The phrase "lost episode" has followed Plato's Stepchildren for decades. It sounds dramatic. It suggests suppression. It implies that viewers were denied something forbidden for years. But when we examine the historical record carefully, the label does not hold up in a literal sense. The episode was broadcast nationally by NBC on November 22, 1968. It was not shelved before premiere. It was not pulled from the schedule at the last minute. It entered syndication along with the rest of Star Trek, the original series, when the show began its second life in reruns. It has appeared in every major home video format, from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray. It is included in streaming releases. There was no period where the episode was erased from circulation, so why does the myth persist? Part of the answer lies in how stories evolve within fan communities. Over time, documented hesitation became retold as outright refusal. Internal debate became framed as censorship. The narrative gained momentum because it fit a compelling arc. A network tries to silence history. Creators fight back. The episode survives against the odds. That version is dramatic. It is also incomplete. NBC did debate the content. Executives did request alternate takes. There were legitimate concerns about affiliate reaction and advertiser comfort, but those concerns never escalated into a formal ban. The episode was not refused to air in the strict historical sense. Television history does include genuinely lost episodes. Early live broadcasts from the 1950s were often not preserved. Pilot episodes have vanished. Controversial programs have been shelved indefinitely. Plato's Stepchildren does not fall into that category. What it represents instead is a near miss. It symbolizes a moment when corporate caution almost reshaped creative expression. The episode might have aired in softened form. The kiss might have been altered. The impact might have been diluted. That possibility is what fuels the legend. It was not lost, but it could have been changed in a way that reduced its historical significance. There is also another layer. In later decades, Star Trek became a cultural institution. Fans revisited early controversies with renewed attention. Interviews with cast members, including William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols, highlighted the behind-the-scenes tension. As those accounts circulated, the episode gained a reputation for having survived attempted suppression. Accuracy requires clarity. The episode aired, it was distributed, it remained accessible. The power of the story lies not in disappearance, but in proximity to disappearance. It reveals how fragile certain cultural shifts can be. A few different executive decisions might have reshaped television history. That narrow margin between hesitation and broadcast is what gives the episode its enduring mystique. It was never truly lost, but it was never entirely safe either. Why it still matters more than 5 decades later. Plato's Stepchildren remains relevant, not because of its science fiction premise, but because of what it revealed about the intersection of television, culture, and corporate power. At its core, Star Trek, the original series, was built on an optimistic vision. It imagined a future where humanity had moved beyond racial division, beyond prejudice, beyond the social fractures of the 20th century. That vision was not subtle. It was embedded in casting, in dialogue, in authority structures on the bridge of the Enterprise. Lieutenant Uhura was not a background presence. Portrayed by Nichelle Nichols, she held rank. She operated communications. She was respected by her peers. In the context of 1968 American television, that visibility alone carried weight. Representation was limited. Roles for black women were often restricted or stereotyped. Uhura was neither. The kiss scene amplified that visibility. Although written as coercion within the narrative, it forced audiences to confront an image that many networks had historically avoided. It showed physical intimacy across racial lines on primetime television. The fact that it occurred in a science fiction setting did not dilute its impact. If anything, the futuristic framing reinforced the idea that equality was not merely aspirational, but inevitable. The significance also lies in the audience reaction. NBC feared backlash. Executives anticipated resistance from affiliates and advertisers. Instead, the response was largely supportive. That outcome demonstrated something fundamental about media institutions. Networks often underestimate their viewers. They assume audiences are less adaptable than they truly are. The episode also highlights the importance of creative insistence. Gene Roddenberry consistently used science fiction as a vehicle for social commentary. The willingness of the production team to preserve the scene rather than dilute it mattered. Without that resolve, the moment might have been softened into irrelevance. There is another layer to why it matters. Cultural progress rarely arrives through sweeping declarations. More often, it emerges through contested decisions that seem small at the time. A casting choice, a line of dialogue, or a few seconds of screen time. Plato's Stepchildren illustrates how those seconds can echo across decades. Today, interracial relationships on television are common and unremarkable. That normalization did not occur in isolation. It developed gradually through moments like this one. The episode serves as a historical marker. It reminds us how recently certain boundaries existed and how easily they might have persisted longer. Its endurance is not about myth. It is about documented tension, measured risk, and a broadcast decision that reflected a shifting society. The episode was never erased. It was debated. It was nearly adjusted. It was ultimately aired. And in that sequence of events, we see how television can both mirror and influence cultural change. Plato's stepchildren was never a vanished relic hidden in vaults. It was something more revealing. It was a test. A network measured public reaction before the public even had a chance to react. Executives hesitated. Creators held their ground. The episode aired. History did not collapse. Instead, a quiet boundary shifted. The story reminds us that progress often depends on decisions made in conference rooms as much as on performances delivered on screen. It shows how fear can shape art, and how sometimes, despite that fear, art moves forward anyway.